Hello guys, welcome. We're going to be looking at a series of things today. We're looking at keywords, identifiers, and data types. So you may be asking yourself, what's a keyword? Now, a keyword is simply a words which are reserved. When it comes to programming, these are words which are reserved. That is, they have predefined abilities or capabilities, and they are to be used only for that particular purpose. So keywords are reserved words which have standard predefined meaning in C. They cannot be used as a program defined identifier. Now, we talk about identifier, we're simply talking about things like variables. In this case, that is, we identify a variable. Now, we cannot want to create a variable and come and use auto. Why? Because this is already a keyword. Now, the computer already knows that this auto already has its own meaning. Break has its own meaning. Do has its own meaning, which does his own task on its own. So we can't use it again to do something other than what it was meant to do. If we try to do this, it's going to give us an error. So let us rush up to this guy here. Let's just delete that out, and we'll have here a set of identify keywords. We'll have keywords like int. It's a keyword, it's reserved to be used only for int, while the main is reserved for what it does throughout the printf return. These are all keywords which are to be used for their specific functions. Now we're going to be looking at a data type. Right now, you may be asking, what is a data type? Now we're talking about data types. We have the various types of data types, but now let's come to a definition. You see, in C programming language, data types refer to an extensive system used for declaring variables or functions of different types. The type of variable determines how much space it occupies in storage and how the bit pattern stored is interpreted. Now we'll talk about data types. We're simply looking at the kind of data we can store in a particular variable. Now you discover that a variable, let's look at just normally a variable is simply like something where we store information. Something where we store information. Now it's called a variable because that information can be changed. Now when we're defining a data type or we're setting a data type to a particular variable, we're simply telling the computer that this particular variable has its own kind of data which can be entered into it. It can either be a string, an integer, a floating point number, that's a real number, or it can be a character, all those kind of things. And each data type has its own specific kind of operations which can be carried out on it. It has its own specific kind of operations which can be carried out on it. We'll look at that subsequently and we'll move ahead. Like for example, just look at something like the integer and a string. When we talk about a string, it's simply a combination of letters or characters. Now let's look at, we can add numbers, we can add integer numbers. That's quite okay, but that is like normal addition, subtraction. But now when it comes to things like letters and strings, we cannot really add. We cannot add them, but we can join them. So you discover that you have different kinds of operations which are going to be done on each type of data. So I have data types. Now the common data types which we have the integer data type. We have the float, and that is float for the integer. First of all, let me start integer. Simply as here when we're dealing with integers, we are defining variables which have an integer value. That is, an integer value is a whole digit which does not have a fraction. Now come to floating point types. While here we're looking at real numbers, that is, it has a fractional part of it, it has its decimal point and so on. So there's the enumerated, there is the type void, which simply tells us that it's like empty, that no data type has been given yet. That is a data type void. Now I have the derive, I have pointers. We look at pointers ahead. We're going to look at arrays, structure types, unions, function types. We'll look at all of this ahead. So now let's just head back here to see and look at how to determine or how to define a variable. Now for us to be able to determine the variable, we need to follow this format. That is, first of all, define its data type, give the variable name. Now this variable is an identifier. it identifies something, and then we give its value. It's not in all cases where we can give its value. Now let us say we want to determine, or want to create an integer value, a number. That's the name of the variable, number. Now we can give it a value 6. That is its value, right? As well as we can also determine, we can also create a float, that is a decimal number. Let's call this let's use real number. I can give its own value 2.4. If we are to print this value, it's going to give us 2.4. Now there are various ways of me defining an integer. Now let's take, for example, I want to define like 4 integers: num1, number2, num2, and so on and so forth. These are our integer numbers. First of all, let me give you some very vital tips. Now let's say I want to define something like num1. We cannot define this num1 like this. We cannot define like this, num then space 1. The computer will not understand. It's going to give us an error if we try to compile it. There's an error here. It expects that we should put like either something here, a hyphen. We should just put something which like identifies it. So we cannot give spaces when naming or when defining variables. We cannot give spaces, like for example, username. Let's say for example, username, we cannot write user space then name as one. This thing, the computer will not understand it. So we have to like join it together. Now if we use something like hyphen, what happens? It's not going to be proper. The computer does not understand it. So for us to be able to do this, we have to use an underscore to be able to do this. Use an underscore. Altogether we use an underscore to join it. Now you can add whatever thing you want to put there. You can even start this variable with an underscore. It depends on you. You see the same thing, the computer will understand it quite better. Now as I said, if we want to define all of these are integer numbers, a shortcut or a shorter way of doing this is if I delete this. After I define the first one, I can give its own value, give its values, okay, then comma, give the name of the next one, comma, give the name of the last one. I can give them values if I wish, and I end it here. The program runs quite well. So I can give this one value, let's say 2, let's say 5. I've given them value. The same thing works with float. Now we're going to look at the next kind of data type. We're going to be looking at the next kind of data type. We're going to be looking at the character. Now a character, simply when we talk about a character, simply talking about as it is just a character, a single character. Now a character can be a letter, it can be a number. But now when defining a character, let's define it. For example, let us say letter. Let's get the letter A. Now for us to be able to define this character, if I run this is not going to work like us using numbers that we just wrote numbers without putting them inside inverted commas or whatever. If I run this, an error there. So whenever we are to define a character, we put it inside this single quotes. Put inside this single quotes, the computer understands it, prints it. Good. And that's it about data types and variables. So follow this final format: the data type, the variable name, and the value. Now if I also define things like functions, also use the data type, the function name, and we'll do whatever thing that function has to do. We'll write out its program. Now let us look at how to print this information. Now let's say we want to print an integer value. How are we going to print this integer value? So let's just come here and say this is number. They will print the value, and to print, for example, this number here, this is number that. So for us to be able to do this, we're going to look at some certain things. Now if I were to print an integer, I'm going to use some certain, if it's print a float, any decimal number. All right, inside we have this this character is a percentage sign d. This simply tells the program that whenever you see a percentage sign d, it tells you that there's an integer number there, an integer number. So now this integer, this, let's say for example in this printf were to print a number, let's say a number, this number here, this variable here, what I'm going to do is we'll say this number will print the number here. We're going to write here percentage t inside here. Now to not write this percentage t outside of this inverted commas open and close, it should be inside where you want this number to display. It should be there. So if I run this program, let's see what happens. Nothing happens. This is a number, it just prints us garbage because it's not giving it a specific value. Now what we're going to do is we're going to come here and they will define the number. That's the variable name. So when the computer comes and reads here, the first thing to find after this printf is that we're finding a variable here which it has to print. So let's run this and see. This is number 6, right? Let us print this one, and this guy. Let's print them all. So these are numbers. So these are numbers. So I'll print the first number, comma the second number. Now you guys know this comma has nothing to do. It doesn't affect our percentage t, whether I write whatever thing. So far as it reaches percentage t, the computer understands it. Then percentage t. So I'm going to print num1 and num2. Right, which is the first percentage t, it reads this one. Second percentage t, it reads the second variable. The third reads the third value. Let's run this. These are numbers 6 to 5, and that is okay. Now let us say we were to print rather this float number. So let us say a real number here. Let's see what happens if I were to print here. What do we get? We get garbage. Because first of all, this is a float number, or rather printing but an integer number. Tell the computer to print an integer number, so use this percentage f to print this float. So that's it. 2.4. we can define the number of decimal places. As I said, we can define the number of decimal places. Now for us to be able to define this number of decimal places, we'll put this percentage dot 2. It means that after our dot, that is after our decimal point, we'll just display rather 2. Display just 2 digits. Let's run it to have 2.40. That's okay. I'll put just 1. And we run 2.4. So that's it. We can now print, let's see how to print a character. Percentage c, it does print which character, it does print letter. And that's the character I want to print. That was the character A. I was thinking of that if it was a string were to print. Now we're going to look at strings in the near future. We'll be looking at arrays, we'll look at strings. So that's basically it, how to print values from variables in C. In our next video, we're going to be looking at how to grab a value. We're going to be looking at operators, that is the addition, subtraction, is operators, and logical operators and arithmetic operators. So see you in the next video. Stay tuned.